right, it's 2 o'clock. We'll get started. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a great weekend. We are here for session 3 of 6 of the proposal intensive course. Welcome back. Just a few quick housekeeping items. We do have all of our breakout room moderators back with us today, so the groups will be a little smaller. And just a reminder to please be sure to turn your camera on when you're in the breakout room. I understand sometimes in the general meeting, folks don't want to, that's fine. But in the breakouts, it really helps for everybody to have their camera on and interacting. We will get to those in a little bit, but first let's talk about what are we going to go over in terms of content today. Today is about budgets. And I guess the first thing I want to say is don't be afraid to build a budget. Don't be afraid to use the template. You're not going to break anything. It really is one of those things you just dive in and learn by doing. And we're going to actually do a demo, and then we're going to work in the template in the breakout sessions, and then we're going to get another chance in the homework. So lots of opportunities to try it out. And the more you try it out, the easier it will get. So learning objectives today, what are the common components that go into these budgets? We'll talk about that. We'll look at sponsor guidelines to see where the budget limits are discussed and where the requirements are discussed for a particular funding opportunity announcement. We'll understand F&A, that's facilities and administrative costs, and that's also called indirect costs. And those are interchangeable terms. We'll talk about that. Fringe benefit rates when you're budgeting for personnel, and then other rates that apply here internally at Stanford. We'll do a demo of the budget template, as I just said. We'll develop a draft budget justification for the PI. This really advances your proposal. You'd be surprised. Starting that Word document and sending it to the PI to revise is going to get a more prompt and accurate response than just asking for one without supplying that. And then what are the procedurally, how do we go about finalizing the budget between, being that liaison between the PI and RMG? How do we get that finalized? And then the other thing I wanted to mention is there's a lot more information on budgeting. I'm going to give you the highlights, but there's a ton of information on budgeting in the RAC training materials here under pre-award management, budget development. And I particularly want to draw your attention to, there's a whole slideshow just on budgeting, on the actual line item budgeting of sponsored projects here in the shared folder. So if you hit a snag or you just want more information, maybe you're new to this, check that out. There are a lot of resources there in the training materials that can help you out. All right, so first thing you want to do, we talked about the funding opportunity announcement quite a bit in the first 2 sessions, and here I am again, the first thing talking about the FOA because it really is that important. So what are we going to look for? The annual funding limits and whether those are direct or indirect costs. And I've got a link here, and the link is to the NIH definition of what are directs and indirects. If you're a research administrator, you've probably heard this before. If you're in more general administrative, you may not have heard this before. So the quick and dirty on this is a direct cost is a charge that is the actual charge for the performance of the scientific project. So it's the dollar that you spend for a pipette or a centrifuge, or the dollar that you spend for salary effort for a member of the personnel. It's the direct cost of performing the project. And then the facilities and administrative cost is a percentage that is assessed on that dollar that supports Stanford's infrastructure. So the lab space, the lights that are on in the lab, the paper towels that people use to dry their hands after they've washed them from doing an experiment. Even people like us who are helping prepare proposals and move paperwork through the system and get funding in and out the door. That's administrative, facilities and administrative, it's indirect costs, same thing. And so Stanford's indirect cost rate right now is 57.7%. So that means for every dollar we've spent on a centrifuge, Stanford gets an additional 57.7 cents to support the performance of research at the university. So we get that dollar and we get the 57.7. But when we're budgeting, the sponsors break those out separately. So we need to make sure when we're looking at that budget limit, is that on direct costs or total costs, which is direct plus indirects. And I'll show you some funding opportunities after we've gone through this bullet list. Then we need to check, is the indirect cost rate, so what I just described is for the federal government. We have this Office of Naval Research rate agreement that we have with the government. And I'll show that to you here. This is available, downloadable from the Do Research website. It's publicly available and all universities have these. And you can Google them. You can Google University of Washington negotiated rate agreement. You're going to get that agreement. They're everywhere. They're public information. So here you can see this is the rate agreement. Just like I said, 57.7% for organized research. Every now and then you'll see off campus. That's typically for the clinical translational research unit. You might see those as off campus rates. If you have a PI that's doing animal work, the portion of mouse costs are going to be 75% for the FNA rate. So you want to check this chart sometimes depending on the type of project that you're working on. But then you can also get the future rates. So once the fiscal year turns over September 1st, our rate actually goes down to 57.4% for organized research, 29.2 for off-campus, and 72 instead of 75 for animal care. But if you don't have this, if it's not a federal sponsor, you need to check that funding opportunity announcement to find out what indirect costs, if any, the sponsor will support. The other thing you want to find out from that FOA, how many budget years are permitted? Are there any required budget elements, such as travel or administrative, on top of the FNA? There may be a specific requirement deep in the guidelines. Any cost share requirements, and then any other required proposal elements that may have associated costs, like say that they are requiring an annual collaborative meeting, or maybe there's some pilot projects proposed in the out years. And when I say the out years, I mean, if there's a 5-year project, you have year 1, and then years 2, 3, 4, and 5 are called the out years. So let me give you an example. Here's a funding opportunity that I supported a submission for last summer. It was a special COVID opportunity, U54. And I want to show you that there are a couple of places where you find this information, and this is why we have to read these so carefully. So first thing is, okay, here's the award budget, cool. Application budgets are limited to 1.5 million direct costs, right? So there's that distinction, direct costs. And they're saying here, exclusive of third-party facilities and administration FNA costs. What that means is the direct cost limit is Stanford's direct costs plus any subawards direct costs. That's what's going into the 1.5 million total. So we can have 250,000 direct costs. Our sub can have 50,000. We've got 300,000 total direct costs per year times 5. That's 1.5 million. We're fine. And there will be indirect cost requests from Stanford and the sub-site. Those are not counting towards this limit. And see here, we can see the award project period is 5 years. Okay, so we've got our framework for this funding opportunity. But wait, there's more. If you read down further into the opportunity I've highlighted, check this out. In the administrative core, because this is a multi-project opportunity, in the administrative core, you also need to budget for a center administrator. They're saying propose and budget for a center administrator to manage day-to-day operations. Travel funds, you need to budget in addition to presenting the results of the research at national conferences, which is the typical reason for travel. You also need to include center and network activities. In the CIRONet, it's called CIRONet investigator meetings. So there's a special set of meetings. You have to budget for those. Funds for trans network project. Check this out, really detailed. Beginning in budget year period 2, applicants must allocate 10% of the annual budget within the direct cost cap to a restricted fund, and you have to call it collaborative funds. And it has to be in the other expenses category. So they're really drilling down. NIH is saying, we expect it to look exactly like this. And so that's why we want to read these funding opportunity announcements cover to cover. Here's an example of one that is non-NIH. You may remember that in the earlier session, we looked at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation Fellowship Awards. These are the research grants for the established PIs. And the funding amounts right up front, $125,000 per year, plus an additional 12% of indirect costs. So they have a lot less than the NIH. So that means $125,000 direct costs per year, plus 12% on top of that, and they can be approved for 2 years rather than 5. Okay, so there's our framework. But again, there is more. If you go down into the funding opportunity announcement, there's a budget information here, and check this out. Indirect costs. Indirect costs may be requested for all expenses except the following: equipment, computer software, software licenses, and tuition. And NIH has rules about this too. It's called modified total direct costs. And so they will exclude some of these items. They do exclude major equipment and tuition as well, but they don't exclude software license or computer software. So how do I figure that out? I just go to the NIH grants policy statement. This is another document that I suggest that you demystify. Feel free to go in here and check out the policies. It's going to be in here exactly what goes into modified total direct costs. So this is just giving you a flavor of why we need to look so deeply into the funding opportunity announcement to make sure that we've caught all of the details. All right, so now we've read our FOA, we understand what the sponsor restrictions are. Now we want to talk to our PI and find out, what are you anticipating spending on this project? So what are the common line items in the budget? always personnel. There has to be PI effort at minimum because the PI is leading the project, overseeing the project, and the performance of all the pieces of it. There is a School of Medicine PI effort policy. You can find it in the RAC training materials. If you go to post-award management, there's effort tracking and reporting is folder 5, and it has School of Medicine sponsored project faculty salary support policy right here, which is that the PI has to devote effort and budget for that effort. So not optional, even if your PI would like to believe it is, you can share the policy with them. And you can find it in the guide, in the RAC training materials. You can also find it on RNG website. Personnel effort for other personnel, co-investigators, postdocs, instructors, research assistants, all of that. The people who are carrying out the project will be budgeted with a % effort, and that's basically their salary plus fringe. And we'll get to the fringe rates in a minute. Consultants, if you have any outside consultants who are maybe working on the project on an hourly basis to do some specific piece of it, you would budget for that. Equipment, if there's something that doesn't already exist at Stanford, and we have a lot of equipment here, so I don't see this line item too often, but if you did need it, you would put it in here. Supplies, this is pipettes, reagents, centrifuges, like the stuff that you need to work in a lab. Travel, if any, we talked about that, could be general conferences, it could be specific network meetings. Patient care, this is what's being performed at Stanford Healthcare, SHC. This is working with actual people. That is considered patient care. And then other costs, a lot of the other costs end up being purchased services. So it could be clinical translational research unit, sample processing, it could be flow cytometry, it could be genomics. These tend to be pretty expensive line items. They go in the other cost category along with publication costs. And then if you have a subaward, if you have an investigator at another institution who's doing a piece of the work, you would put that on the budget. It's also called consortium costs. It's the same thing. Subaward, consortium, same thing. Okay. Next, we are going to go to rates. So the facilities and administrative costs we already talked about, set by the sponsor and look in the FOA. The fringe benefits, this is a percentage of the person's salary costs and it's based on their employee classification. And this is available on the Do Research website. So when you go to do research, there's a whole page called rates. And I always joke that this is my favorite page on the Do Research website because it is just chock full of all the details that you need to build your proposal budget. So it's got your F&A rates here. First thing, the ones we talked about, 57.7 for the current fiscal year, 57.4 for the new one. And then lots of details. Here's where you get the rate agreement that I just showed you. And then down here, fringe benefit rates. Regular, that means staff and faculty. So the majority of your budget is probably going to be at this rate. It's 29%. But if you have a postdoc, you need to budget at 25.1%. Grad students, 5.3. Contingent, those are your temps, 8.1%. So you can look those up. They change every fiscal year. You can look them up each year. And then the last type of rate, and this is unique to Stanford rates, and these are only allowable on non-federal awards, and even then, not all non-federal awards. So TGP is tuition grant program. You may know that's the one where Stanford employees have been here for 5 years or more. Their kids can have their tuition costs defrayed by the university. Part of the way the university pays for that is charging sponsored projects 3.25% of personnel costs on grants. So, you know, you want to understand kind of why the university really loves grants. It helps pay for facilities through the facilities administrative costs. It helps pay for tuition grant program through this percentage, and it directly pays for people's salaries. So a lot of good things coming out of these research grants. The other one is converged communication charge. This is a 3%, and that's basically, that's a School of Medicine only. And it's basically to pay for computer, you know, Zoom and telephone and all the different pieces of communicating throughout the school. So again, it's on the Do Research website. Here's the TGP rate of 3.25%. It's listed right here in this chart. And then if you go further down, you can see vacation accrual, which is that's something you work on in post-award. And then there's a lot of other rates. And here's the converged communications fee, School of Medicine only. And there's details on the fee there.